Fred Otto Kehl, United States Army, World War II. Fred served with the infamous 42nd Infantry Division in World War II. They fought in World War I, World War II, and the War on Terror, so they're still going today. And Fred was a rifleman and then later an Intel NCO. He helped liberate the Dachau concentration camp, folks. Such a gripping story he tells. I interviewed Fred in Alaska, my only trip to Alaska. It was 2009, July 12, 2009 in Anchorage up there. I interviewed over a dozen veterans of all wars, and Fred's story, I think it's the first on my Voices of History channel. I want to thank Julia Holner for sponsoring this story. Julie, I salute you. Thank you for your service as a firefighter. She's retired now. And thank you for helping me tell Fred's story today, because without that help, I couldn't have done it. And many people are going to learn more about World War II and what Fred did in the concentration camps and as a soldier. And Julia, I thank you. God bless you. Folks, my heart's full today. This is just such a powerful story. I was so happy when Julia said she wanted to sponsor Fred's story. Like I said, I've got more of them from that time in Anchorage and had a great trip there. I still have very fond memories up there. I've been very fortunate and blessed to be able to travel over 500,000 miles and just see a lot of the country, a lot of the world. But Fred's story is one of the best that I have, and I'm happy to share it today on the Voices of History YouTube channel and Voices of History radio channel. Some of you are getting turned on to the radio channel. You're going to sleep listening to these stories. Oh, it's comforting to me. It really is. I listen to it all the time in my car, on my phone, in my home, wherever I am. It brings me comfort to know these stories are broadcasting, and hopefully many people will start listening to them. I'm looking for truck drivers, children, stay-at-home parents, children in schools, in the palm of their hands, living history, folks. Download the apps on the app stores, Voices of History Radio, and you got it made. It's a free app. But I'm just so happy to share these stories with you. And if you'd like to sponsor one of these stories, like Julia did, I have hundreds and hundreds more of them. I would encourage you to do so. There's information in the video description below the video and on my website, larrycappetta.com. Click on Sponsor a Vet and include the veteran's name, and I'll do the rest. And a lot of you are starting to do that. It's such a blessing. I thank God. This is a ministry to me, folks. Helping people, helping families, and just honoring our veterans, giving honor to whom honor is due, preserving our history before it's lost, and allowing people to learn. This is like a time capsule. These stories are like a time capsule. People will see them in 5, 10, 15, 20 years, 100 years, and they'll see what happened, and they'll hear the stories, and they'll see why we were free, what they did to make us free and to not lose those freedoms. So I encourage you to sponsor a story if you can. And if you want to donate to my work, there's information in the comments section of the video. You can donate. And thank God for all of you that have stepped forward. You're making it possible for this station to continue, the radio station and this YouTube channel. And read the comments, folks. Send me a comment. Send me an email. I'd love to hear from you. And like I said, if you want to sponsor a story, let me know. So, Fred Kehl, what else can I say about Fred? One of the most gripping stories of the concentration camps and the liberation of those. He said it changed him forever as a young man, and of course it would have. I remember he shared a lot of pictures of Dachau with me when I interviewed him, but just a great man. He's gone now. He passed away in 2016. He was 83 when I interviewed him in 2009, so he lived a full, rich life and did a lot of things with his life, and to be honored today on Voices of History YouTube and radio station. God bless you. Thank you for watching, subscribing to these stories, and I'll talk to you again.
I'm 83.
Okay, what year did you go into the military?
The what?
What year did you go into the military?
1944.
And were you drafted or?
Drafted.
Army?
U.S. Army, Fort Sheridan, Illinois.
Oh, wow.
Took my basic training in Camp Blanding, Florida.
What was your MOS? What was your job in the military?
Well, first I was a rifleman, but then afterwards I was intelligence NCO,
Okay.
and then I became CID agent, criminal investigation agent.
Okay.
That was after the war was over, and I was still stationed over there.
So when did you go overseas? What, 44?
44, wait a minute, no, we went over in 44.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I'm going to jump around in the story a little bit because I was talking with probably Brittany yesterday or Jared. You have obviously talked to some of them about your war experiences, but
Yeah,
they mentioned that you were at Dachau.
we were. We
Were you in
liberated.
the Battle of the Bulge?
We were in the Battle of the Bulge.
Okay, let me start right there. Okay.
Okay.
Just give me a little bit of history of the Battle of the Bulge and your involvement during that time, late 44.
We came into the war in France, southern France, and were sent to Strasbourg, Alsace, which is a French province on the Rhine River, a month before the Battle of the Bulge began. Right across the river was a little town called Kehl, spelled exactly the same as my name, and when my buddies found out about it, I took a lot of flack being called the Kraut and all that kind of stuff, which I didn't mind. That was okay. The Battle of the Bulge began a month later, and we had to retreat back to the province of Lorraine. And we stopped in Nancy, the city of Nancy. Most of the Battle of the Bulge was up north of us, and the 101st Airborne Division saved the Battle of the Bulge from getting any further than it did. They held out at Bastogne. Those guys really deserve a lot of credit for holding the German army at bay, because they wanted the seaport of Antwerp very badly, and they couldn't take it as long as the 101st held out. General Patton's Third Army units went up there to relieve them, and they were there under the most terrible conditions. It was foggy. They couldn't get supplies to them. They tried to drop supplies through the fog, and the Germans got most of it because they couldn't tell where the town was. In any case, once the Battle of the Bulge was over, we were refitted, regrouped, and replaced with replacements, and the entire main line of resistance from the British forces up north all the way down to the southern end of the main line of resistance, which was known as the front line, jumped off with artillery barrages beginning at 6 a.m. This lasted until about 11 a.m., and we could hear the shells flying overhead and breaking out in front. Once the artillery was lifted, we in our immediate sector had 4 P-47 Thunderbolt fighters strafing the Germans on the roads leading back to Germany. And when we came through after the P-47s, and by the way, the pilots call those jugs. I don't know why, but maybe it was because they were fat-looking planes and they just called them jugs, but they were P-47s. There were burning tanks, dead German soldiers, dead horses, dead cows, burning trucks all the way through until the main line of resistance stabilized, and then we had some firefights in the Harz Mountains, and we regrouped there again. And once we started the main push into Germany, we went right smack through the Siegfried Line. It was not even a problem. We were very lucky as a division, because by the time we got into the war, the German Air Force was all but finished. They had plenty of planes, but no gasoline to fly them. So we didn't have to worry too much about strafing, being strafed. Horrible thing. We went through Worms. That's the city where Martin Luther did a lot of his work. We bypassed Frankfurt am Main, on the Main River, and headed south toward Nuremberg. We captured Nuremberg, and we headed for Würzburg, which is the wine country. Würzburg was a very strange thing happened there. We pulled into the city in the late afternoon and went right straight through the main part of town to the outskirts of Würzburg, and just a few blocks away the hills went up where all the vineyards were. I pulled guard duty about 75 feet from the main drag that was going past our house that led into those hills. At 2 a.m., I heard a bunch of racket. I was out in front of the building. I heard a bunch of racket coming down that road. It was at least a platoon size of German troops, and they must have been soused up on the wine, because they were making so much racket. They were yelling and laughing and just carrying on like they were drunk. When they got right opposite the building that I was in front of, Rainbow troops at the end of the street opened up on them with machine guns and rifle fire, and all hell broke loose. I was ready with an M3 to take them, any of them that decided to come down my street, but they never came. But what they did do was they retreated back up into the wine country and left behind a bunch of dead and wounded. And I sat there and stood there listening to them moaning until daybreak broke, and if they were still alive at that time, they were hauled off to the nearest German hospitals. After Würzburg, we bypassed Schweinfurt, but we happened to be close enough to Schweinfurt to see B-29s, a whole squadron of them, bombing the living daylights out of that place, because that's where all the ball bearings were made, in Schweinfurt. And the ball bearings were a very important part of the German war effort, and that's one of the reasons they leveled that place. From there we went toward Munich, and of course we had to cross the Danube River to get there. The engineers had put up a pontoon bridge. The river was swollen from spring runoff. I went across in a Jeep, and there was a farmhouse on the other side, which we established as a headquarters. The German army was still in retreat. In the early afternoon, the pontoon bridge broke. It couldn't stand the rising water. the Danube was still on the rise, and we lost a bunch of tanks that were on the bridge, and they went down, the men went down with it. So that was a tragedy. So they had to rebuild that bridge. Dusk came along, and a whole battalion of AAA anti-aircraft set up on the other side waiting for the bridge to get completed. And here comes a lone P-47 fighter about 1,000 feet in the air. All you could see was a silhouette, and almost always, at least once, twice a week, we had a Focke-Wulf fighter come to check us out at dusk to see. There was an intelligence operation that the German army had to see what we were up to. Well, this battalion of AA thought it was a Focke-Wulf, and they opened up on this P-47. It was a classic example of friendly fire. A solid sheet of tracers went up there. A fly couldn't have gotten through there. And how this pilot got out and pulled this ripcord on his parachute, I'll never know. But his plane went right into a hill and burst into flames, and he came down swearing like you would not believe. "You SOBs, what in the hell are you doing? Blah, blah, blah." He really reamed us out, the battalion of AA. And when he got down to the ground, "I want to see the commander." And he reamed the commander out, who was outranked him. You know, this guy was a captain, I think, or at best a lieutenant, a first lieutenant. And the battalion commander said, "Sorry." That's about all he could say. It was too late to do anything else. But that was a strange thing that happened. And about 15 miles outside of Munich, the frontline troops of the 42nd had already passed through Dachau, and I was right behind them because my job at that time was a harbinger. I speak, read, and write German, and my job was to follow right behind the frontline troops until the main line of resistance stabilized, and then I would drop back to the first village or town that I went through, and I'd start kicking Germans out of their homes so that regimental headquarters, which was coming up behind, could move right in and keep the war effort going without any interruptions at all. And then I would stay there until the front line started to move again, and then I would jump off and get behind the troops. So that's what happened to me. By the time I got there, there were still a lot of prisoners left. Those that were there the longest had even by the time I got there, had no idea what was going on. They had no idea that they were being liberated because of the length of time that they were there, and they all had that very familiar 1,000-yard stare. Those that were there the shortest period of time were kissing our hands and hugging our legs and hugging us and thanking us for finally relieving them from this hell on earth. There were about 50, 40, and 8 boxcars sitting on the siding. And when our troops opened them up, they were all half full of dead people, except for one guy that was still alive. And it was a miracle that he was even alive. But they were brought in there to be cremated, and they didn't make the crematory. The members of the 42nd did violate the Geneva Convention. They executed the prison guards who were denounced by the prisoners. I was not present when this happened. But the reason that they were executed was because of malady. The German SS troops, which were the scoundrels of the earth, executed about 150 American prisoners of war at the outskirts of Malmedy. They should never have done that. It made us very angry and vengeful. And anybody that was wearing an SS on their collar in the German army, there wasn't a heck of a lot of sympathy for them, because they were bad people. After we liberated Dachau, and by the way, you couldn't feed these people any food because their digestive systems were so starved out that solid food would have killed them. And so they were hauled away to German and American field hospitals and given liquid food and brought them out of it if they could even live through that. I never followed it, so I don't know how many survived and how many died. There were a lot of prisoners that couldn't even get up off of the ground. They were so weak, they just laid there. They were probably anywhere from minutes to hours away from death. The sad part about all this is there are American Nazi Party, the KKK, the skinheads, all of those kind of white supremacy groups in this country all say that the Dachau and Treblinka and Belsen never happened. I was there. I saw it with my own eyes. My mom and dad came from Germany after World War I, and I was ashamed by association of seeing what I saw in Dachau just because I was of German descent, even though I had nothing to do with what happened there. It was the ultimate crime of man's inhumanity to human beings. If the Nazi Party, whatever form it takes, ever gets into power again, the first people that they will line up in front of their firing squads will be the Jews. When they get done with those, they will take black Americans and line them up. And when they get done with those, they will take people of color, Indians, natives, Eskimos, you name it. And when they exterminate all of those, and us white folks will be the ones left, if we don't kowtow to the way they think, they will line us up last. Guaranteed. From Dachau, we went through Munich, and we couldn't, for the length of time, figure out where the Messerschmitt 262 jets were. We sent planes out, intelligence flights out, took pictures everywhere. On the outskirts of Munich, on the way to the Czechoslovakian border, which was just weeks away from the end of the war, we found them on both sides of the Autobahn. where they cut out little places on the side of the Autobahns, which is a superhighway, just like the new Seward Highway. And they put camouflage over them, and they parked them there, and they used the Autobahn for runways. That's where they were. After the war ended, we were on the outskirts of, we were on the Czechoslovakian border in a place called Pauling. General Mark Clark sent word that General Kesselring's army that fought against the Fifth Army and General Mark Clark's units in Italy, they were already surrendered and they were leaving early through the Brenner Pass to go home. And they sent word for us to process them to make sure that there were no high-ranking SS generals or colonels or other people like that that got through in disguise or with weapons of any kind. And so that's what we did. We lined all these people up. There were hundreds of thousands of them. Just that whole German army that was in Italy came through Brenner Pass. And a very strange thing happened to me. I was a 19-year-old kid searching all these German soldiers, and each one of them had in their pockets what is known as a Saltbuch, or a soldier's book. It was their equivalent of our dog tags. And when you open these Saltbuchs, books, open them up, had a picture of the guy, his family history, what he, where he came from, and all that. So we checked all of those to make sure that the picture was the same as the guy that was standing in front of me. Well, the German army enlisted women in the army, but they were never in any direct combat units. They were in AAA units, anti-aircraft units. Well, here I'm searching these guys, and here's this German girl, German soldier, about 19 or 20 years old, same age as me, very nice looking, attractive girl. And I'm taken a little bit aback. How am I going to search this lady without getting a little bit familiar? I had to pat her down because we didn't have women in the frontline troops. They were WACs, but they were all in the United States doing other duty. So I'm patting her down and I'm looking her over, and she is watching me look her over, which is, I think, natural to do. And she said in German, "Was willst du, ein Sechser?" Well, I heard the word Sexa, which I translated into sex. That's not what she meant, and I didn't get it. But the guy next to her poked her in the ribs and said, "Watch it." He said, "Pass auf." And so I knew that she had said something bad. And but I didn't know what it was, and I didn't find out until much later what a sexa was. What a sexa was is a slang expression in German for one of their coins. Just like a 25-cent quarter piece, they don't call it that anymore, but in my day they called it 2 bits. A half a dollar was known as 4 bits. And that's what she was saying. She was saying, "Well, I hope you're getting a good look for the, you know." And so that's when I finally got mad, but it was too late to do anything about it. So anyway, that was a kind of a weird thing that happened to me in that period of time. After that, we did occupation duty in Austria. We started out in Salzburg, and we went to Wurgel, and we went to Innsbruck, and we went to Bad Gastein and stationed throughout Austria, one of the most beautiful countries in the world. And from there, because I was speak and read German, I was transferred to Berlin and became a CIC agent, which is a counterintelligence corps, which was assigned to arrest and seek out high Nazi officials in the Nazi Party and in the SS. My unit captured and arrested Axis Sally. Are you familiar with Axis Sally? Are you familiar with Tokyo Rose?
Yes.
Axis Sally.
Tokyo Rose.
Yeah, well, Axis Sally was her counterpart. She was an American citizen who got caught when the war started, but was given the opportunity to leave, but she had plenty of friends over there, so she decided to stay, and she also was brainwashed into committing treason. And I remember her well because when our division came up to the front line in Strasbourg, she came on the radio and welcomed us. She said, "Oh, welcome to the 42nd Rainbow Division. How are you, boys? Why are you here? You can't win this war. You should be back home with your families at Christmas time by the fireplace, enjoying your Christmas because you're not going to win this war." And she went on and on and on. And then she started playing Harry James and Glenn Miller, which is what we were listening to. It was very nice. We didn't pay any attention to her, but her name was Margaret Gillers. And what tripped her up was she was always one step ahead of us. And what tripped her up was she bought a piece of furniture in one of the furniture stores and left it there. And we found out about it, so we waited for her to come back and get it. And when she got it, we arrested her. And we asked her, why? Why did you become a traitor to your own country? And she thought about it for a minute, and her answer was, when in Rome, do as the Romans do. And that cost her 30 years. She was from Ohio. I don't know where she is now. I didn't even know if she's alive. From there, I went into military intelligence division. Military intelligence division, and I had my own spy network. This was during the Cold War when I went back to Germany for the second time, and I had my own spy network made up of German citizens who lived in the East Zone. They would come in with reports of intelligence to add information to our war room, and all that information eventually ended up in Heidelberg in a huge war room in General Eisenhower's headquarters. And but Eisenhower was long gone. There was a different general there at the time. But anyway, then I finally ended up in Frankfurt, Germany, in criminal investigation division, and did a lot of criminal work there.
Right.
And that's about the end of my story.
Well, tell it one more time, okay? Start from that. Hey, powerful. I mean, excellent. I'm going to ask you some follow-up questions.
Oh, okay.
Kind of digress from combat, but all these years later, I mean, did you talk about this stuff after the war, or was it a lot of years later that you started talking, like what you saw at Dachau and some of the harder stuff? Did you hold that inside all these years?
Yeah.
When did you start talking about it? Recently, maybe, or?
Yeah, I started talking about it when the Jewish nation started, and together with the United States, started the Holocaust.
Museum?
Yeah, the Holocaust Museum, and I had bought some stamps and a history of the stamps of the first Jewish synagogue, and I think it was in New Jersey. And this goes back to George Washington's time. And one of the statements that he made at that time was bigotry and, he used another word, shall have no quarter. And this was in response to the flack that some Americans were giving the Jewish people for starting a synagogue in, I think it was New Jersey. And I donated that to the local Jewish church or synagogue. And I was asked to do some lectures on what happened to me and what I just got done saying, only in more detail.
You mean there's details you left out for me?
Well, some of the, yeah, there was
By the way, I'm working on a film right now called Yom HaShoah, which is the Holocaust Remembered. This is my current film and the Battle of the Bulge, but I'm working on, I've already interviewed Jewish survivors of the Holocaust, and I'm blending those in with stories like you of who they call liberators. So I've got a lot of stories like you, so that's this film, and then the Battle of the Bulge. So any more details you can give me about either in the remaining 10 or 15 minutes that I have, give them to me if you have any more. If not, that's fine.
yeah.
You told it really well. What you told me was fine, so I don't need, real gruesome stories, just, how it affected you, maybe even all these years later. How can a loving God allow that to happen type question, or just the evil of humanity, like you said, so.
Well, I was fortunate enough as a Rotarian about 12 or 13 years ago, the International Rotary organization had an international convention in Munich. I jumped on a plane at Anchorage and flew Lufthansa to Frankfurt and then to Munich to attend that. And my main reason was to rent a car and drive back to Dachau. And I did that. And the experience that I had going back, I will never forget that as long as I live. Just as bad as when I was there the first time. There's a little town before Dachau concentration camp called Dachau. You pass that and you reach Dachau itself, the first thing you see is the fence. Then you'll see the main gate, and I turned in, parked the car. As soon as I got to that fence and got out of that car, I don't know how to explain it, but the air just came down. It just got heavy. I don't know how else to explain it. It didn't affect my breathing at all, but I could feel it. And the only explanation I have is that it must have been the spirits of all of those people that died there under the brutality of the Nazis. It was a real awful feeling. That's all I can tell you. All of the barracks buildings were torn down except 4. The main administration building is still there. It wasn't there when I was there, but it is now. If you go through the front gates, you'll see a bronze plate, and I've got pictures of it at home. with the rainbow patch, shoulder patch, telling the story of the 42nd Rainbow Division liberating Dachau concentration camp.
How do I get a copy of that or scan
Or
it or something?
I can fax it to you, or
Something for the video. That's a good original reproduction if it's a picture or an article, but it's something you can get an original copy or come down here and she can scan them or something and email them to me. I would like that.
Okay.
And anything along the lines of the Holocaust or the Battle of the Bulge that you have in your possession, you could work with Kat on that. She can get them to me. So that's important. I'm working on that film right now. So.
Be glad to help.
How did that change you? That experience as a person? Did you have faith in God? How did it change your views of God or life and death? The whole Dachau thing, before and after.
Well, first and foremost, I have a special place in my heart for the Jewish people. They endured a lot. Yeah. Religiously, I happened to be Lutheran. I had a better, keener outlook about God than I had before. My son, by another marriage, my youngest son, is married to a Jew. Her parents are Jewish, and I met them both, and I told them when I visited them in my son's home in Deerfield, Illinois, my experience in what happened. So they know my feelings about Jewish people, and I hold them in very, very high regard. It's too bad that the far right or left, I don't know which it is, Arabs are out to wipe them out. They want them off of the face of the earth. It's too bad that they cannot see the inhumanity of that. The president of Iran is saying that Dachau never happened. It's ridiculous. Anyway, there's a few times that I could tell you about where I came pretty doggone close to buying the farm, if you're interested in that. I don't talk about it too much, but I was in the tail end of a 2.5-ton truck. We were 11 vehicles in a little column approaching a village. This was before crossing the Danube, and there was resistance up there. And so we stopped. We could hear a little bit of gunfire up there, and there were infantry troops of the 42nd passing us in a column headed toward that village. And I was sitting there like this, looking out the back of the truck, and here comes a Jeep with 3 men in it. And I saw this flash, and then an explosion and a puff of smoke, and the Jeep came out of that puff of smoke and landed on the pavement about 100 yards behind me, and the lieutenant who was in the front seat landed about 20 feet in back of my truck on the pavement, killed him instantly. And the 2 guys in the Jeep went out the sides into the field, and I don't know whether they lived or died or what. But we found out later that they struck a teller mine with a ratchet device on it that was set for 12 vehicles, and we were the 11th vehicle. if you don't think I don't think about that one for every once in a while. And there's the time in Würzburg, there were bullets flying all around. You could see them hitting buildings. The troops were shooting in every direction because they just didn't know what to do. Once they were receiving fire from the other end of the street, why, it stopped them dead, and they were firing in the air and firing just every direction while they were retreating. They had to be drunk. It's because they were making so much racket.
Let me ask you a question. I never asked this before, and we're just about out of time, by the way, so I've got a couple quick questions after this. But having worked in the funeral business all these years, did you ever think about I don't know if you saw the crematorias, but just the fact that there was so much cremations happening there. What are your thoughts as a funeral director? Did you ever think about that when you were working in this business? Or did it remind you of that? Or, I mean, just that whole concept to me is just appalling. And I know funeral homes cremate, but still, did you ever think about that when you were working in this business?
Well, yeah, but it just, the thoughts just passed through because I was doing something that I had to pay attention to. And so, yeah, it reminded me of Dachau and all those different places that cremated these people. And but I didn't let it linger. I just let the thoughts go through and kept busy doing something else.
I heard that the soldiers had gone through combat, but they weren't prepared for what they saw at the concentration camps. Is that kind of true for you? And also, you think there's things that maybe you saw that you just have forgotten because you have to forget because they were so bad? Or did you see all the bad? Maybe you just saw the emaciated people, which was bad, and you saw the boxcars, but I mean, I know some people I talk to, they're not going to tell me everything, and I don't want to hear everything.
Yeah.
But do you think there's a human mechanism that shuts off some of that stuff just to keep sane?
Yeah, there's always some incidents that occurred on both sides that I don't talk about, that anybody doesn't talk about. It's that bad. I was not prepared for Dachau. And when I got there and saw what was happening, I don't recall throwing up or anything like that, but I was deeply affected by it, and as were all of the American troops. I just, yeah.
That's enough. That's good. What is 2 questions. This is off of combat and concentration camps, but having gone through all that as a veteran, as an American citizen, and having seen people without freedom, what does freedom mean to you as far as what we have in our country and the price for freedom?
Freedom to me is the Constitution of the United States, and we're losing it little by little. That's the bad news. The good news is, I think that the American people are beginning to realize that, and that they're starting to do something about it. The biggest enemy of democracy is apathy. We have become a nation of good time Charlies, and there's nothing wrong with that. We should be. We should enjoy our freedoms, but we enjoy them so much that we forget about the price that was paid to get it. It's not only in World War II, but right back to the Revolution. Our forefathers died for that Constitution and freedom.
I agree. I think we're losing it too.
Yeah.
What about the American flag? What does it mean and represent to you as a veteran?
It means the love of country and everything that I hold dear about this country. It is a sacred piece of cloth. And when I see it trampled on or thrown on the ground or burned by some idiot, I become very angry. But
Do you think we're forgetting about World War II as a country, and why is it important that we remember?
because Hitler's dream was to have the Third Reich last for 100 years. And that meant world domination of the National Socialistic Democratic Workers' Party, the Nazi Party. And that meant enslavement of people that were conquered, and if they didn't kowtow to the Nazi program, they were eliminated. They not only eliminated their enemies, but they eliminated kids with Down syndrome. If your nose was crooked, if you didn't look right, if you had a blotch or your eyeball was cockeyed, you were eliminated. You were subhuman in their eyes. And they would get rid of you one way or another. That's why we were there.
Well, they considered themselves the Aryan race, right? The
Blonde hair and blue eyes. That's what they were striving for. And they didn't matter if a woman was married or not. They had these SS people having sex with married people that were blonde and blue-eyed women to propagate and produce this Aryan race. It was a law that they had to do that, regardless of the husband's objections or anything else. That's how goofy this whole thing was. That man changed a lot of things in this world. He brought out the worst in the world. He could have done so much for Germany. He could have made Germany one of the most productive, peaceful nations in the world if he had just left World War I and his feelings about the Versailles Treaty alone. The Versailles Treaty was an unfair treaty that put Germany in a very bad place. They were starving to death after World War I, and he couldn't let that go. So when he got to power, he wanted revenge. That's why he had, when he conquered France, where did he have him sign the papers? In the same rail car that the Versailles Treaty was in. That tells the whole story right there. He got his little piece of revenge. He was a nutcase from the word go. It's too bad that he was Jewish on top of that. And he had succeeded in erasing all of the Jewish parts of his family. Any paperwork, any member of his family, they were either done away with that were Jews. In Austria is where he was born. And they all of that was destroyed so that nobody could point a finger at him. But the secret got out anyway.
Hitler was Jewish?
He was of Jewish descent. He sure was.
Yeah, I know he wasn't born in Germany, like you said, Austria, but boy.
Well, you know what Austria is called? Österreich. You know what that means literally? East Reich. The East Reich. That's why they speak German there. And that's why they were so easy to conquer. It practically opened him, welcomed him with open arms.
You have so much knowledge. I mean, I've heard a lot of stories. You're on a roll here, man. This is good information.
Listen, you can take the Communist Party and the Nazi Party and take them apart nut by nut and bolt by bolt and lay them aside on a big table side by side, and you have twins. One of them is the extreme right and the other is the extreme left. And yet they're twins. In Russia, there were only 3% of the population that were in the Communist Party. In Germany, only 9% were party members. The rest were citizens who either kowtowed to it or didn't. If they claimed they didn't know, I don't know how the hell they could not know what was going on when their neighbors were hauled off in the middle of the night, never to be seen again. And you know what? When I was stationed in Berlin, my mother asked me to contact her sisters who lived near Berlin. I had to check them out because I was in CIC to make sure that they weren't party members. If they were party members, I wouldn't have anything to do with them. And it turned out that they weren't. So I did contact them, and they came and we visited on the outskirts of Berlin on weekends in a little outdoor coffee cafe. But that was just to please my mother, you know.
I'm at the end of my tape, but fantastic. I'm going to ask you to do one more thing, Fred, that I ask all the veterans to do. I've done almost 700 interviews in the last 6 years, so this is across the board. But I'm going to ask you to give me a salute into the camera when I tell you, okay? Is that okay?
Sure.
From where you're seated, that'd be great. Okay, so right into the camera. Go ahead.
Now?
Yes. Great. Thank you.